They say the truth doesn't need a voice. It just needs the right moment to be seen. And that moment arrived under a ceiling of crystal chandeliers where every light reflected off polished marble and champagne glasses, where the hum of quiet wealth softened as Ethan Cole stepped forward in a tailored black suit that fit like power itself, the room already leaning toward him, waiting, phones lifted, cameras steady. Because this wasn't just an engagement dinner, it was a statement, a merging of names, of empires, of a future that looked flawless from every angle. His fiancée stood beside him in white silk, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the diamond catching the light with every breath. And for a second, everything aligned exactly the way it was supposed to, until the doors at the far end opened with a soft click that no one noticed at first, not until a figure stepped in wearing black and white. A simple uniform that didn't belong in a room like this, a tray balanced in her hands. Her posture straight, but her fingers tightening just enough to betray the storm beneath the surface. Nia Carter didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She moved like someone who had already decided she had nothing left to lose, weaving past tables where conversation slowed, where eyes began to follow without understanding why. Because something in the air shifted the moment she crossed the threshold, like a quiet truth stepping into a room built on appearances. Ethan's voice carried smoothly as he thanked his guests, his tone practiced, controlled, the same voice that closed million-dollar deals and ended negotiations before they began. But it faltered just slightly when his gaze drifted, just for a fraction of a second, catching a silhouette that didn't belong to his present but refused to stay buried in his past. He froze, barely noticeable to anyone else, but enough to break the rhythm, enough to make the woman beside him glance up in confusion, enough to let silence slip into the edges of the room like something waiting to be named. Nia stopped near the edge of the spotlight, not stepping into it, not claiming it, just standing where the light brushed her face and revealed eyes that didn't ask for recognition, didn't beg for explanation, only held steady with something deeper than anger, something quieter, something final. Beside her, a small hand tugged gently at her sleeve. A little girl no more than 4, her curls soft against her cheeks, her dress simple compared to the shimmer surrounding her, but her presence heavier than anything in the room, because she wasn't looking at the crowd. She wasn't distracted by the lights or the music or the weight of expectation. Pressing down on everyone else, she was looking at him. Ethan's breath caught, subtle but real, as the child tilted her head, studying him with a familiarity that didn't belong to strangers. Her eyes tracing his face like she was matching something she had seen before, something she had carried quietly without understanding its weight. The room hadn't fully noticed yet, not completely. Conversation still hung in fragments. Glasses still hovered midair, but the moment was already tightening, already pulling everything toward a point that couldn't be undone. Nia didn't speak, didn't move forward, didn't call his name. She simply stood there with her hand resting lightly on her daughter's shoulder, her silence louder than any accusation, her presence more powerful than any interruption. And for the first time that night, Ethan Cole, the man who controlled every narrative he stepped into, felt something slip beyond his reach. Then the little girl leaned closer to her mother, her voice soft but clear enough to cut through the thinning noise. "Mommy," she whispered, her eyes still locked on him, unwavering, certain. "That's Daddy." And in that single breath, the air shattered, the music seemed to disappear, and every camera in the room turned. Not because they were told to, but because something undeniable had just stepped into the light. The word did not echo. It settled, heavy and undeniable, as if the room itself understood before the people inside it did. And for a moment no one moved, no one breathed, because a single sentence from a child had just rewritten everything that had been carefully staged under those lights. Ethan's fingers tightened around the stem of his glass, the faintest tremor running through a hand that had never shaken in front of an audience. His eyes locked on the little girl as if distance could somehow change what he was seeing, but it did not. The shape of her face, the quiet steadiness in her gaze, the way she did not hesitate or look away, it all pressed into him with a familiarity he could not deny even if he wanted to. Beside him, his fiancée's smile faded in slow confusion, her posture stiffening as she followed his line of sight, trying To understand why the room had shifted, why conversations had dissolved into whispers that were growing louder by the second, phones now fully raised, lenses adjusting, capturing, feeding on the moment as it unfolded without permission. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. But Ethan did not answer, because he could not. Because the past he had buried without ceremony was now standing 10 feet away from him, not as memory, not as regret, but as something living, breathing, and impossible to ignore. Nia remained exactly where she was, her shoulders squared, her chin level, her hand resting gently on her daughter's back in a gesture that was both protective and grounding, as if she had rehearsed this moment not in words but in strength. And when her eyes met Ethan's again, there was no accusation there, no plea, only a quiet certainty that said she had already survived everything that led up to this and did not need anything from him now. The little girl shifted slightly, her fingers curling into the fabric of her mother's sleeve. But she did not hide. She did not retreat. She simply kept looking at him with the kind of openness that only comes from someone who has not yet learned to doubt what she sees. And that innocence hit harder than any confrontation ever could. "Ethan," his fiancée pressed again, louder this time, drawing the attention she was trying to control but could not, because the room had already chosen its focus. The narrative no longer belonged to her, or to him, or to the carefully arranged future they had been about to announce. He finally moved, just one step forward, then another, as if pulled by something he did not fully understand, his voice coming out lower than usual, stripped of its usual precision. "Nia," he said, and even speaking her name seemed to shift the weight in the air, confirming what many had already begun to suspect. A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers layering over one another, speculation building into something louder, more dangerous, because this was no longer a private moment. It was a public unraveling, and everyone present knew it. Nia did not respond immediately, letting the silence stretch just long enough to remind him of what it felt like to not be in control. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, untouched by the tension surrounding them. "We are not here for you," she said, each word measured, each one landing exactly where it needed to. "We were just leaving." And the simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation could have, because it removed him from the center of her world in front of everyone who had once believed he was untouchable. Ethan's gaze dropped briefly to the child again, his mind trying to reconcile timelines, memories, decisions he had made without looking back. And for the first time in years, the certainty he built his life on began to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but in small, undeniable cracks that spread with every second he stood there. "Wait," he said, the word slipping out before he could stop it, before he could calculate the consequences. And that alone was enough to shift the balance again, because Ethan Cole did not ask. He decided, he commanded, but now he was standing in front of a woman who no longer responded to any of those things, and a child who had already spoken a truth that could not be undone. Nia paused, just slightly, not turning fully back, not offering him the full attention he was used to receiving. And in that small, controlled hesitation, the power in the room shifted completely away from him, leaving him standing under the same bright lights that had once elevated him, now exposing him instead. As every camera continued to record the moment, he realized that the one story he had never prepared for was the one he could not walk away from. The word hung between them longer than it should have, not loud, not dramatic, but impossible to ignore, and Ethan felt it settle into his chest with a weight that did not belong to the moment he had planned, but to a past he had never finished. His eyes flicking from Nia to the little girl again, as if repetition might change what he was seeing. But nothing softened, nothing blurred. The resemblance only sharpened the longer he looked, the quiet certainty in her expression echoing something he recognized but could not control. Around them, the room began to breathe again, but differently now, whispers spreading like a slow current, guests leaning closer to one another, voices lowered but urgent, each person trying to make sense of a story that had just shifted in front of them without warning, phones angled more deliberately, recording not just a celebration but a fracture. His fiancée stepped slightly in front of him now, her presence no longer decorative but defensive, her voice tighter, edged with something sharper than confusion, "What is going on?" she asked, not to the room, not even to Nia, but to him, demanding an answer that he could not yet give. And for the first time since the evening began, Ethan Cole had nothing immediate to offer. No prepared statement, no controlled narrative, only a silence that stretched too long. Nia finally turned back fully, but not toward him, her attention dropping to her daughter, adjusting a loose curl away from the child's face with a calmness that felt almost deliberate, as if reminding everyone watching that this moment, as chaotic as it appeared, was something she had already carried long before anyone else became aware of it. "We are leaving," she repeated softly, her tone unchanged, not asking permission, not waiting for approval, just stating a fact that belonged to her. The little girl shifted closer to her, one small hand still gripping her sleeve. But her gaze did not leave Ethan, as if she was trying to understand why the man she recognized was not moving the way she expected him to, why he was standing still when everything in her seemed to say he should come closer. Ethan took another step, slower this time, careful, almost uncertain, his voice lowering as if speaking too loudly might break something fragile that had just surfaced. "How old is she?" he asked, the question simple, but heavy with everything it implied, and the room quieted again, because this was no longer speculation. This was confirmation taking shape. Nia looked at him then, directly, her eyes steady, not defensive, not emotional, just clear. "4," she said, and the number landed with precision, aligning timelines in a way that did not need further explanation, because the math was simple, undeniable, and it did not leave room for reinterpretation. His fiancée exhaled sharply, stepping back half an inch as if the air itself had shifted too much for her to stand comfortably in it, her expression hardening as she looked between them, understanding beginning to replace confusion, but not accepting it. "Not yet. This is not real," she said under her breath, but the cameras were close enough to catch it, close enough to turn even her doubt into part of the narrative unfolding in real time. Ethan did not look at her, could not, because every part of his focus had narrowed to the child in front of him, the way she stood, the way she watched him without fear, without hesitation, and something inside him, something he had trained himself to silence in every other part of his life, began to push forward, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a truth that had waited too long to be ignored. "Why did you not tell me?" he asked, the words coming out more quietly than intended, less accusation than confusion, less control than vulnerability. And for the first time that night, his voice did not belong to the man the room expected him to be. Nia's expression did not change, not even slightly, and that was what made the answer hit harder, because there was no hesitation in it, no emotional build, just a calm clarity that carried more weight than anything else spoken so far. "You left," she said, and the simplicity of it cut through every layer of the situation, reducing it to a single truth that did not require elaboration, did not need context, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. The little girl looked up at her mother for a second, then back at Ethan, her voice softer now, but still certain. "Are you coming with us?" she asked, not as a challenge, not as a demand, just as a question shaped by a child's understanding of connection. And in that moment, every eye in the room fixed on him again, not waiting for a speech, not waiting for a performance, but for a choice he could not avoid, standing under the same lights that had once made him untouchable, now forcing him to decide who he was when the truth finally stepped into view. The question did not sound like pressure, it did not sound like expectation, it sounded simple, almost gentle, but it landed heavier than anything else that had been said that night. And for a second Ethan did not move, because the answer was not something he could calculate or negotiate. It was something he had to choose, and that was the one thing he had avoided doing when it mattered most. The room held its breath again, the kind of silence that does not come from politeness but from anticipation, every eye fixed on him, every camera steady, waiting for the moment a man who controlled everything finally faced something he could not control. His fiancée stepped forward sharply now, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the tension beneath it, her hand gripping his arm with a firmness that was no longer subtle. "You are not going anywhere," she said under her breath, her voice tight, controlled, but edged with urgency, and for the first time her presence felt like resistance instead of support, like something trying to pull him back into the version of himself the world expected. Ethan's gaze did not shift to her, not immediately, because the weight in front of him was still stronger, still clearer, the small figure standing beside Nia, waiting without impatience, without doubt, as if she had already accepted whatever answer came next. He swallowed once. The movement barely visible, but enough to betray the shift inside him. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than it had ever been in a room like this, stripped of projection, stripped of performance. He started, but the word did not carry the authority it usually did. It paused, searching for something real instead of something rehearsed. Nia did not interrupt, did not help him, did not soften the moment. She simply watched, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if she had already lived through the consequences of his silence and did not need to protect him from it now. The whispers in the room grew again, not loud, but constant. A low current of speculation, of judgment, of fascination, because what they were witnessing was not just a personal moment. It was a shift in power, a man being pulled out of the narrative he'd built and forced into one he never prepared for. His fiancée released his arms suddenly, stepping back half a pace, her expression tightening into something colder, more calculating, as she realized that the attention she once stood at the center of was no longer hers to command, and that realization did not sit quietly. It sharpened, turning her silence into something watchful. Ethan finally looked at her then, just briefly, and in that glance there was something missing that had been there only minutes ago, the certainty, the alignment, the ease, all of it replaced by something unsettled, something incomplete, and that was all it took for her to understand that whatever control she believed she had over this moment was slipping. He turned back, fully now, toward Nia and the child, and when he spoke again it was not louder, not stronger, but clearer. "I need to talk to you," he said, the words directed at Nia but carrying beyond her, into the room, into the cameras, into every space that would replay this moment long after it ended. Nia held his gaze for a second, then another, measuring not his words but the weight behind them, and what she saw did not move her, did not soften her stance. It simply confirmed what she already knew, that whatever he was feeling now came years too late to change what had already been built without him. She shifted her hand slightly on her daughter's shoulder, a quiet signal, not dramatic, not urgent, just enough to guide the next step. "We are leaving," she repeated again, and this time there was no pause after it, no hesitation, because she had already given him the moment, already allowed the truth to stand in front of him, and she did not need anything more from the room or from him. The little girl looked between them, her eyes lingering on Ethan for a second longer, as if waiting for something she could not yet name. Then she turned with her mother, her small step steady, her hand still holding onto the fabric of Nia's sleeve. And together they began to walk away from the light that had exposed everything. Ethan did not follow immediately, not because he did not want to, but because something inside him was still catching up, still breaking apart, and rebuilding in real time. And as they moved further from the center of the room, the distance between them became something visible, something measurable, something that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The cameras tracked them, then him, then back again, capturing the space that had opened between past and present, between who he had been and who he might become. And for the first time that night, Ethan Cole understood that the most important decision in the room was not the one he had planned to announce, but the one he had just been given, standing there under the fading weight of attention, watching the only two people who had just rewritten his life walk steadily toward the exit. The distance between them should have been enough to end it, enough to close the moment cleanly, but something in Ethan refused to stay where it was, something louder than reputation, louder than expectation, and before the room could fully reset, before the whispers could settle into conclusions, he moved, one step, then another, faster this time, not calculated, not controlled, just driven by something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Behind him, his fiancée's voice followed, sharper now, no longer quiet, no longer contained. "Ethan, do not do this," she said, each word edged with warning. But he did not stop, because stopping would mean choosing the version of himself that had already failed once, and this time the cost stood right in front of him. Nia had almost reached the doors when she heard his footsteps closing the gap, steady, unmistakable. And she slowed just enough for the moment to catch up with her, not turning immediately, not giving him the satisfaction of urgency, only acknowledging his presence when it reached her. The little girl looked up again, her eyes lighting with something softer this time, not certainty, but hope, small and unguarded, the kind that does not understand disappointment yet. Ethan stopped a few feet behind them, close enough to see the details he had missed from afar, the way her small fingers curled, the quiet confidence in the way she stood beside her mother, the reflection of something familiar in her expression that made it impossible to look away. "Nia," he said again. But this time her name did not sound like a recognition. It sounded like a question he had no right to ask, and for a second he did not know what came next, because nothing in his life had prepared him for a moment where words mattered more than control. She turned then, slowly, her face calm, unreadable, the same composure she had carried through the room now focused entirely on him. And in that stillness, she held the power he had lost the moment she walked in. "You already said what you needed to say years ago," she replied, her voice even, not raised, not trembling, just firm enough to settle the space between them. Silence counts too. The words landed without force but with precision, cutting through any attempt to rewrite what had happened. And for a moment Ethan had no defense, no explanation. That did not sound like excuse. No version of the past that could stand against the simplicity of what she had just said. The little girl shifted closer to him now, just one small step, her curiosity pulling her forward in a way that ignored the tension surrounding them. And she looked up at him with a question still resting quietly in her eyes, not spoken again, but still there, still waiting. Ethan crouched slightly, not fully, not dramatically, just enough to bring himself closer to her. Level, a movement that felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, but necessary. And when he spoke this time his voice softened in a way no one in the room had ever heard. "What is your name?" he asked, the question simple, but carrying more weight than any introduction ever could. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying him again before answering. "Maya," she said, her voice steady, her gaze unbroken, and the name settled into him like something he should have known all along, something that had existed without him, grown without him, lived without him. Nia watched the exchange without interruption, her posture still, her expression unchanged. But there was something in her eyes now, not softness, not anger, but a quiet vigilance, as if measuring every second of this interaction against everything that had come before it. Behind them, the room had not recovered, cameras still focused, guests still watching, the story already moving beyond the walls they stood in, spreading into something larger, something that would not be contained once it left this space. Ethan straightened slowly, his gaze moving from Maya back to Nia. And this time there was no attempt to control the moment, no effort to reshape it into something cleaner, only a recognition that whatever came next would not be his to decide alone. "I did not know," he said, the words raw in their simplicity, stripped of anything that could make them sound strategic. And for the first time that night, he was not speaking as a man protecting his image, but as someone confronting a truth he had avoided for far too long. Nia held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, not in agreement, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement, as if confirming that the truth did not need to be argued to exist. And with that, she turned again, her hand guiding Maya forward, leaving him standing there with the weight of a life he had just discovered and the realization that knowing was only the beginning of what he would have to face next. The doors should have closed behind them without resistance, should have marked a clean ending to a moment that had already gone too far. But the weight of what had just happened did not stay inside the ballroom. It followed them into the quiet corridor where the noise faded and the light softened, where the world outside the cameras felt almost unreal compared to the intensity they had just walked through. Nia did not slow her pace at first, her steps steady, measured, as if distance itself was a form of protection. But Maya glanced back once, then again, her small hand tightening slightly around her mother's sleeve. "He is coming," she said softly, not afraid, not uncertain, just aware, and that awareness carried a calm that belonged only to someone who had not yet learned to fear complicated truths. Nia exhaled slowly, not turning immediately, But she heard it too, the echo of footsteps against polished floor, closer now, unhidden, uncareful, and when she finally stopped, it was not because she was surprised, it was because she had expected this. Not tonight, not like this, but eventually, because truth has a way of finding its path no matter how long it is delayed. Ethan reached them just before the exit, the glass doors reflecting all three of them in a single frame. A reflection that did not match the life he had built, and for a moment he stood there, catching his breath not from the distance but from the weight of what he had stepped into. The silence between them no longer filled with an audience, but heavier in its own way, because now there was no distraction, no performance, only the reality he could not walk away from. "Do not leave like this," he said, his voice lower, stripped of the projection that once filled rooms, and in that quiet space it sounded different, less certain, more human, and for the first time it was not meant to be heard by hundreds, only by two people who had already lived without it. Nia turned then, slowly, her expression unchanged, her composure intact, but there was a shift in her eyes now, not softer, not warmer, just clearer, as if this was the part she had prepared for long before tonight. "Like what?" she asked, her tone calm, almost neutral, but the question held more weight than it seemed, because it forced him to define what he thought this moment was, and what he believed he deserved from it. Ethan hesitated, just for a second, because there was no answer that did not expose something he was not ready to admit, and that hesitation said more than anything he could have spoken, because it revealed the gap between what he wanted to say and what he had actually done. Maya looked between them again, her gaze softer now, not searching for answers, but simply observing, absorbing, and she stepped a little closer to Ethan, not fully closing the distance, just enough to show that the connection she felt did not come from fear or confusion, but from something instinctive, something she did not question. "Are you really my dad?" she asked quietly, the words simple, direct, and without hesitation, and in that moment the entire weight of the situation narrowed to a single truth that could not be avoided or redirected, because the question did not come from the past, it came from the present, from a child who was not asking about history, but about identity. Ethan's breath caught again, but this time he did not look away, he did not search for an easier version of the answer. He simply nodded once, slowly, the movement small but absolute. "Yes," he said, and the word did not echo, it did not need to, because it settled immediately, firmly, into the space between them. Maya held his gaze for a second longer, then smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a quiet, genuine expression that carried no expectation beyond what had just been confirmed. And that simplicity hit harder than anything else had that night, because it asked nothing from him except truth. Nia watched the exchange without interruption, her posture steady, her presence unchanged, but there was something new beneath the surface now, not acceptance, not forgiveness, but a recognition that the moment had shifted from revelation to consequence, and that whatever came next would not be defined by what was said tonight, but by what was done after it. Ethan straightened slightly, his eyes moving from Maya back to Nia, and for the first time since he had followed them out, there was no attempt to control the direction of the conversation, only a quiet urgency that did not demand, but asked. "Let me fix this," he said. And the words hung there, uncertain, incomplete, because neither of them believed anything about this could be fixed so easily. And in the reflection of the glass doors behind them, the three figures stood, in silence, not as a family, not yet, but as something undeniable that could no longer be ignored or undone. The words did not land the way he intended, not as a solution, not as reassurance, but as something unfinished, something too small for the weight it was trying to carry, and Nia's expression did not change, not even slightly, because she had heard promises before, not spoken in the same tone, not shaped the same way, but empty all the same when they mattered most. She looked at him for a long second, measuring not the words themselves but the space behind them, the years that stood between what he was saying now and what he had done then. And when she finally spoke, her voice remained calm, steady, untouched by the urgency in his. "You cannot fix something you never stayed to understand," she said, each word quiet but grounded, leaving no room for misunderstanding. And in that moment it became clear that this was not a situation waiting to be repaired. It was a reality that had already been built without him. Ethan felt the weight of that settle deeper, not as resistance, but as truth, the kind that does not argue, does not escalate, just exists in a way that forces everything else to adjust around it. And for the first time in a long time, he did not push back, did not try to redirect. He simply stood there, absorbing it, letting it reshape the way he understood what was in front of him. Maya looked between them again, her small brows pulling together slightly as if she could sense the tension without fully understanding it. And she stepped closer to Nia, her hand sliding into her mother's, grounding herself in the only stability she had ever known. But her eyes still drifted back to Ethan, curious, open, waiting in a way that did not demand anything but still held everything. "Are you coming with us?" she asked again, softer this time, not because she doubted the answer, but because she wanted to hear it differently, wanted it to feel certain in a way that matched what she had just learned. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but heavy, and for a second he looked down, not in avoidance, but in thought, as if the answer required something deeper than instinct, something more deliberate than reaction. And when he looked back up, his voice carried a different weight, not louder, not stronger, but clearer. "I want to," he said, and there was no hesitation in that part, no calculation, just a simple truth. But it was followed by silence, because wanting and doing had never been the same for him, and Nia knew that better than anyone. She gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in encouragement, but in acknowledgement, as if accepting the honesty, without accepting the outcome. "Wanting is not the same as showing up," she replied, her tone unchanged, but the words settled firmly between them, drawing a line that could not be crossed by intention alone. Behind them, the faint echo of voices began to return, the distant murmur of the ballroom bleeding back into the corridor as the world they had stepped away from started to catch up again. But it felt far away now, secondary, almost irrelevant compared to the quiet intensity of the moment unfolding here. Ethan glanced back briefly, just for a second, seeing the glow of lights through the glass, the silhouettes moving, the life he had been standing in only minutes ago. And for the first time, it looked different, not wrong, not empty, but incomplete in a way he had never allowed himself to recognize. When he turned back, his focus settled again on Nia and Maya. And this time there was no attempt to control the direction, no effort to reclaim authority, only a quiet determination that had not been there before. "Then tell me what showing up looks like," he said. And the question was not a challenge, not a negotiation. It was something else entirely, something unfamiliar, because it placed the definition of his next step in her hands, not his. Nia held his gaze for a moment, longer this time, and something shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough to be felt, because this was the first time he had asked instead of decided, the first time he had acknowledged that the answer did not belong to him, and that mattered more than anything he had said so far. She glanced down at Maya briefly, then back at him, her voice steady but carrying a quiet finality. "It looks like time," she said, "consistency, presence, the things you cannot perform for a room full of people." And the words settled into the space between them, not as instruction, but as truth, the kind that could not be rushed, could not be forced, could only be proven. Maya looked up at him again, her expression softer now, not questioning, not uncertain, just watching, as if she understood in her own way that whatever happened next would not be decided in this moment, but over many others to come. And for the first time that night, Ethan did not try to move forward, did not try to close the distance immediately. He simply stood there, listening, realizing that the only way to step into this new reality was not by claiming it, but by earning his place in it, one moment at a time. The corridor did not feel like a passage anymore. It felt like a threshold, a quiet line between who he had been and what he was now being asked to become. And Ethan stood there longer than necessary, not because he was unsure of what to do next, but because for the first time, doing nothing felt like the most honest thing he could offer. The distant hum from the ballroom continued to bleed through the walls, muffled now, but persistent, a reminder that the world he had built was still waiting. Behind him, still intact, still expecting him to return and continue as if nothing had changed. But something had, And it was not small, not temporary. It was fundamental, and he could feel it settling into every decision he had yet to make. Nia shifted slightly, adjusting Maya's coat with practiced ease, her movements calm, deliberate, as if grounding herself in the ordinary while everything around them tilted. And when she looked back at him again, there was no urgency in her gaze, no expectation, just a quiet awareness that whatever happened next would unfold over time, not in this moment. "We have a bus to catch," she said simply, her voice steady, practical, and the statement carried a kind of finality that did not invite interruption, because it reminded him that their lives had continued without him, structured, scheduled, real in ways that did not bend to his timeline. Maya looked up at her mother, then back at Ethan, her expression thoughtful, as if she was trying to connect the idea of time with the presence of someone new. And she took a small step toward him again, not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to show that the connection she felt was not fading with the conversation. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked, her voice soft, hopeful, and unguarded. And the simplicity of the question shifted everything again, because tomorrow was not a concept he could delay. It was immediate, it was measurable, it was something he could either show up for or not. Ethan felt the weight of that settle in a different way, not overwhelming, but clarifying, and he nodded slowly, not out of obligation, not out of pressure, but because for the first time, the answer aligned with something real inside him. "Yes," he said, and the word carried more certainty than anything he had spoken that night, not because it solved anything, but because it was the first step he was choosing without hesitation. Nia watched him carefully, her eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion, but in evaluation, because she had heard promises before, and she understood the difference between intention and action better than anyone. "Tomorrow is easy," she said quietly, not dismissing his answer, but placing it in context. "It is the days after that matter," and the words did not challenge him. They anchored him, reminding him that what he was stepping into was not a moment, but a commitment that would test him in ways he had never allowed himself to be tested. He nodded again, this time more firmly, absorbing the truth of it without pushing back, without trying to soften it, because he understood now that there was no shortcut through this, no way to rebuild what he had missed without walking through every step of it. Behind him, the glass doors reflected the soft glow of the ballroom, the movement of people, the life he was expected to return to, but he did not turn, not this time, because the reflection in front of him, the one that included Nia and Maya, was the one that mattered now, even if he had not earned his place in it yet. Nia adjusted her bag on her shoulder, her posture shifting slightly as she prepared to leave, and she glanced at him one last time, not for reassurance, not for permission, but to acknowledge the moment as it stood. "Do not come for us," she said, her tone calm, firm. "Come for her." And the distinction settled deeply, drawing a clear line between what he wanted and what was required of him, between emotion and responsibility. Maya looked up at him again, her small hand lifting in a quiet wave, not dramatic, not lingering, just a simple gesture that carried trust without condition. And then she turned, following her mother toward the exit, her steps steady, her presence light, as if she believed without question that he would be there when she asked. The door opened with a soft push, letting in the cool air from outside, a contrast to the warmth and weight of everything that had just happened. And as they stepped through, the space they left behind felt different, quieter, not empty, but waiting. Ethan remained where he was for a moment longer, watching the door close, the reflection fading, and in that silence, he understood something he had never allowed himself to before, that this was not about reclaiming anything, not about repairing an image or rewriting a story. It was about showing up, again and again, in ways that could not be performed or postponed. And as he finally turned, not back toward the ballroom, but toward the exit they had taken, the path in front of him was no longer defined by what he had planned, but by what he was willing to prove. The night did not end when the doors closed behind them. It shifted, it stretched into something quieter but heavier, and for Ethan, the silence that followed was louder than anything inside that ballroom. Because for the first time in years, there was no audience to perform for, no expectation to meet, only a decision that would define everything that came next. He stepped outside into the cool night air, The city lights stretching across the street like a reflection of the life he had built. Bright, controlled, untouchable, and yet it felt distant now, like something he was no longer standing inside but looking at from the outside for the first time. Across the sidewalk, he caught sight of Nia and Maya walking toward the bus stop, their figures smaller against the city but steady, grounded in a rhythm that had nothing to do with him. And for a moment he did not move, not because he was hesitating, but because he understood that this was not a moment to chase, not a moment to reclaim, it was a moment to respect. Maya turned once before they reached the corner, her small hand lifting again in that same quiet wave, and this time Ethan raised his hand in return, not as a promise, not as a performance, but as an acknowledgement that something real had just begun. The bus arrived with a low hum, its doors opening with a soft hiss, and Nia stepped forward first, guiding Maya up the steps with practiced ease, her movements calm, unaffected by the weight of the night, as if she had learned long ago how to carry truth without letting it slow her down. Ethan watched as they disappeared inside, the doors closing gently behind them, and for a second, the reflection of the bus windows showed all three of them again, just like the glass doors had earlier, but this time the distance was real, measurable, something that would not close without effort, without time. The bus pulled away, merging into the flow of traffic, and Ethan remained where he was, his hands at his sides, his posture no longer defined by control, but by something quieter, something more deliberate, because for the first time, standing still was not avoidance, it was understanding. Behind him, the doors to the ballroom opened again, lights spilling out, voices calling his name, the world he had stepped out of trying to pull him back in, but he did not turn, not immediately, because he knew that going back inside would not undo what had happened, it would only delay what he now had to face. He took a slow breath, the air cool against his chest, and reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, the screen lighting up with missed calls. Messages, questions already forming. But he did not open any of them, not yet, because none of those voices mattered in the way one small voice had just changed everything. Instead, he opened a blank note, his thumb hovering for a second before he typed a single word, tomorrow, and beneath it, an address he had not asked for but knew he would find, not through power, not through control, but through effort, through the same persistence he had once used to build everything else in his life. Only this time, the goal was not success, it was presence. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned, not toward the ballroom, but toward the street, his steps steady, unhurried, as if he understood that rushing would only repeat the same mistakes. And as he walked, the noise of the city wrapped around him, familiar yet different, because for the first time, it did not feel like something he owned. It felt like something he was part of, something he had to move through without control. Across the city, inside a moving bus, Maya leaned her head lightly against Nia's arm, her voice soft but certain. He said yes, she whispered, not asking, not doubting, just stating what she believed, and Nia looked down at her, her expression calm, thoughtful, her hand resting gently over her daughter's. Yes is a start. She replied quietly, her gaze drifting to the window where the city lights passed by in soft streaks. But we will see what comes after. And the words did not carry skepticism. They carried truth, the kind that did not rush forward or pull back, just waited. The bus moved through the night, steady, consistent, just like the path ahead of them. And somewhere behind it, a man who had once controlled everything began to understand that the only thing that mattered now was whether he could show up, not once, not for a moment, but again and again, until the word father meant something more than just being recognized, until it became something he had finally earned.